接下来，让我们热烈欢迎前美国国防部国防情报局资安长 Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Virtustream, Mr. Matthew McCormack 为我们带来资安威胁的局势。Ladies and gentlemen, now let's welcome our keynote speaker, Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Virtustream, Mr. Matthew McCormack, to share the topic Cybersecurity Threat Landscape. Please welcome him. 掌声欢迎。
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Somebody drank coffee. Right? Thank you very much for having me. This is my first trip to Taiwan. I've spent a lot of time in a lot of countries, and I will tell you that in the last 3 days, I have met more people who are extremely friendly. I have eaten more food than I have eaten in 3 days, and it's all really good. So again, this is my first trip, but it will not be my last. It's an absolutely beautiful country you live in, and I am very much appreciative of the opportunity to come and speak today. So how many people have heard of Virtustream? Okay, we have a couple. How many people have heard of Dell? Dell? Okay, right. So about 2 years ago, there was a small merger between a little company called EMC and a little company called Dell. Okay? So Virtustream was the cloud division of EMC. At the time, I was the chief security officer at EMC, and I stayed on to move over to Virtustream, which is now the cloud business for Dell Technologies. So I have the opportunity to see a lot of different security initiatives, efforts, challenges going on. I started my career in the Navy. I was a cryptologist. Spent a career in the US government, working for the IRS, which is the tax agency in the United States. I was the CISO at Defense Intelligence Agency before leaving and going to RSA, then EMC, which then became Dell, and now I'm at Virtustream, right? So it seems like I've worked at a lot of different companies, but I've really worked for the US government and one company. It just keeps changing names as it merges with other companies, right? So I've seen a lot of different things in the security space. I also firmly believe that security can be a little bit fun, right? So you have security people and IT people, right? How many security people? All right, there's a couple of us. How much, there's some recovering security people, right? Security and IT people, we started to become more friends. We give each other hugs now, right? We used to be very adversarial. But the way in which the world of security is changing, we all have to start working together. So I have 89 slides, so I better start clicking through quick, right? Your SIMs are only catching about 1% of what's going on. That's not a very high number, right? We want to get that a little bit higher. We could go to 2%, and we will have doubled our productivity. Visibility is the problem, right? Our networks have become so large that we don't even know what we have anymore. Your networks are not just the laptops and servers that it used to be. Identity is still the most important, my personal opinion, the most important thing in cybersecurity right now. It's been around forever. Nothing has changed. Identity was the most important 20 years ago. It's still the most important. Why is it the most important? Because the majority of compromises that are going on today are still with username and password. All the great, wonderful, expensive things going on out there, username and password is still the most common avenue of attack. Malware, it's everywhere. We know it, right? It's not just this might happen. WannaCry last year right? How many people got hit by WannaCry? I sure did, right? Right? Most people did. There's no shame in it. Most people got hit with WannaCry. The challenge that most people had was not a security challenge. Why did WannaCry hit most people? Anybody know? Patching. One of my biggest challenges as a security person is convincing the operations folks to keep their patches up. Patching is not a security problem, it's an operations problem. But that operation problem creates a huge security problem for me. Just like identity, patching is simple, right? It's not really, but it's been around for a long time. We've been patching for a long time. We should, as an industry, be better at patching. 95% of the attacks are using stolen credentials. That's why identity is still the most important thing. Who you are is still number one. So absolutely try and work with some of the new and innovative technologies out there. Don't take your eye off the important stuff that works. Don't forget how important identity is. None of us have unlimited time, and none of us had an unlimited budget. So when I was in the US, my last job in the government, I had a team of about 450 people from a security organization. That was a large team. And you're still fighting the same problems as somebody as a team as big as two, right? The size of your team, while it's important, does not identify or signify how good your people are. Sometimes I would rather have 10 really good people than 100 average people. No more building walls, right? We know this. Walls don't work. Everybody's got a mobile phone, and on that mobile phone you can do almost as much as you can on your laptop. And that mobile phone usually is owned by you. All right, so let's just admit it, right? We can't build the walls. So let's start looking at our data, right? Data is the most important thing. When you look at the amount of data and the amount of devices, it blows your mind, right? 44 zettabytes. Pretty soon they're going to have to invent the next term, right? Went from giga to peta to zeta. What's next, right? Somebody's a comp-sci major in here probably knows what's next. I'm a security guy, I don't know. Right? But there'll be another word. 7 billion people, 30 billion devices. Wow, we're at 4.5 devices per person. And over the next couple of years, that's going to go up. Very good for Taiwan. As the preeminent chip maker, all these new devices have chips. So the world is going to be looking at the people that make the chips for better security, right? They're not just going to be looking at software for security. People are really going to start having expectations of the hardware makers, which really puts Taiwan in the center of what's going to be going on in the security space in the next 5 years. Obviously, when you look at just the growth, how fast the world is changing. Previous speakers talked about the Internet of Things, right? The Internet of Things is everywhere. Everything has IP addresses. Everything has chips. But when you look at 2020, who even knows, right? 50 billion devices. So in the next 3 years, we're going to almost double the 30 billion in a couple years. Think about yourself. You're running out of places to put more devices, right? There's no more room for phones, right? So that means these devices are going to be other things. And we know where these other things are coming from, right? You can set the temperature. Cars are going to be driving themselves. As a security person, that really scares me, right? It's going to be a long time before I get in a self-driving car, because I know all the things that could go wrong, right? Okay, there are some really cool and innovative things. Some things that you can buy anywhere, they've become commodity. Where we're going to be in a year, lots of discussions about drones, right? Within the next couple of years, you're going to see millions of drones all over the sky making deliveries. And what I feel personally is a monumental leap in Internet of Things technology. You can figure out how many eggs you have from your phone before you get home. Okay? Again, security can be fun. It doesn't have to be all serious. We security folks get very serious because the job is hard. When you look at the cost of a breach, we've now started taking score. We know what these cost now. We have data on breaches. And this is really important. If you are a public company or a private company, you have to now start budgeting and planning for an expected breach. In America, there are some states which require that you send a written notification if you suspect somebody's information has been breached. There are some organizations that have 75 to 100 million customers who were involved in breaches. Just the stamps alone, at 44 cents a stamp, it's $44 million just for the stamps. Then you get into $19 US a year for credit monitoring, right? Which doesn't actually do anything, but it makes people feel better. That's real money. Then you look at the stock price of your company. Companies who suffer significant breaches typically see their stock price drop. When you look at some of the largest US corporations that suffered major breaches in the last 3 or 4 years, look at their stock price. All right, so RSA had done some analyses. They talked to a lot of different CISOs. So the first number is true, the second number could be true. So 70% of CISOs said they had a compromise last year. 30% must have forgotten to turn on Splunk. Why? Because pretty much everybody's had some, right? %, not satisfied with the response speed. I know I've never been satisfied with the response speed. I've always wanted my team to respond faster. 10% clearly are not tracking this correctly. I don't know any CISO who's been comfortable with the speed of their team's response. %, of us are reevaluating our security strategies. Oh, by the way, even if your security strategy is working, you should be reevaluating it constantly anyway. Why? Because in the days of cloud, Internet of Things, WannaCry, all these different events going on, you should constantly be looking at how you're doing things, where you're spending your money, where you're getting your people. All right, so if 80% are constantly reevaluating their strategies, the other 20% of us are hiding under our desks, which can become accountants, right? CISO is hard. It is a hard job. Anybody in here a practicing or recovering CISO? Right? No? Nobody? Yeah, they're all hiding, right? This is a very challenging job. And it's getting harder and harder. Why? Because the expectations of what a security officer can do are kind of unrealistic. People are expecting us to do miracles. There's only so much that we can do. So, as I mentioned previously, Taiwan is uniquely purposed, right? Taiwan is in the center of the world for cybersecurity right now. Obviously, largest chip maker. You have a proactive government relationship as opposed to reactive. Taiwan is working forward as opposed to just responding when things happen. That is not normal. Not all countries are working the way Taiwan's government works with its commercial sectors. That is very unique. And I am very glad to see that as I look at different organizations, and I've worked with a lot of governments around the world when I left the US government. So, bravo on the role the government here is taking. Obviously, as Internet of Things revolution goes on, that's all going to be at the chip. the chip will become all important. Massive growth region for technology. More importantly, the amount of scientists and engineers that are being produced per capita in Taiwan is very unique. If you look at the United States, where I'm from, when I was going to school as an engineer, there was a certain percentage of people who were doing engineering. If you look at that number now, 20 years later, it's gone down. Certain countries are producing less engineers. Certain countries are producing more engineers. So when you look at who is going to have an impact on cybersecurity going forward, look to the countries who are producing more engineers. And I hope in America we can turn that around and start producing more engineers. Obviously, one of the biggest things in the security space that's gone on right now, Spectre and Meltdown, right? Everybody's heard of Spectre and Meltdown. It was significant and will continue to be significant. Spectre and Meltdown has changed everything. In the security space, when Spectre and Meltdown happened, everybody was calling me as the security officer saying, "What are you doing for Spectre and Meltdown?" And I said, "Not much." Why? Because typically as a security officer, we operate at a different level in the OSI stack, right? We're at the data, the application layer. We're not down at the hardware level. We're going to need to look to the hardware makers, the chip makers, to figure out Spectre and Meltdown solutions. These two numbers, right? The vulnerability numbers assigned to Spectre and Meltdown. It's going to be years before we have solved these. And this is not just computers and phones. The architecture of chips since 1995 is the flaw, which means this is in fighter planes, tanks, airplanes, cars, anything with a chip, right? Anything with a chip built after 1995 is pretty much affected by Spectre and Meltdown. So it's basically everything. So the good news is you're not alone, right? If you're trying to struggle to deal with Spectre Meltdown, we're all dealing with it. All of us. The reason this is a challenge is because it's exploited below where I can typically monitor. I typically focus on what a person does. Whether it's what they do on their device, what they do with data, remote access. I don't typically look at the chip level. Lots of folks say, that's okay, I'm moving to the cloud and we've got containerization and all these things. Doesn't help, right? As a cloud vendor, the cloud is just somebody else's computer, right? So instead of your computer, it's my computer, which means it still needs to be patched, it still needs to be monitored. All the same issues that you would have had with your own computer, I have. When Spectre and Meltdown hit, my own data centers that we used to provide cloud, we did what everybody else did, and we started rushing out patching. We went to all the vendors and pulled down the patches. Some vendors had patches on day one, right? Seemed really good. Anybody who did that, they know who they are, right? They went to the vendors' websites, pulled down the patches, pushed out the patches. Those patches protected that vendor's stuff. Well, guess what? It broke everything else, right? So when I pull down all my operating system patches, push them to all my operating systems, all of a sudden, my antivirus stopped working, my encryption stopped working, all these other parts stopped working. Why? Because everybody rushed patches out for their own. They didn't think about the whole ecosystem. We tested it on some of our stuff. If it was unpatched, up to 70% slowdown. That is significant, especially if you're in a data center. Whether you're hosting your data or whether you are providing hosting of services or data. 70% is significant. That's a lot. So Spectre and Meltdown are not just made up, they're real. You need to be working on them, and you need to be working with your vendors. Again, reason why, as the preeminent location for the manufacture of chips at the center of the IoT revolution, a lot of people are going to be looking to Taiwan for some leadership on this. It's a unique opportunity for Taiwan. Any security vendor who says their software can catch Spectre and Meltdown, come and see me, because I'd love to talk to you. Because in general, and I haven't seen one yet, it doesn't work. Because of the way Spectre and Meltdown operate at the chip, they're at the hardware layer, software doesn't typically catch it. I would say, if you are a real hardcore computer scientist or engineer, there's some things you can do. I'll just click through them real quick for you, right? Keep your antivirus updated. Why? Not because your antivirus is going to catch Spectre and Meltdown, but because to execute Spectre and Meltdown, you have to gain access to the device. So you can't take your eye off your existing security infrastructure. People still need to get to your device, so keep your basics up to date. And the only other thing you can do is patch everything, right? That's pretty much it. I wish I had a solution for that. I'm struggling with it myself as a practicing CISO. Cybersecurity programs, I'm not going to read all these, are becoming risk-based, right? In some senses, we security people have become insurance salesmen. I can't sell you security. There is no such thing as security. I can decrease your risk based on how much funding you're willing to give me. So it's kind of like buying insurance. And we're still focusing on the fundamentals, right? Don't risk your revenue and mission. Know what your job is. Don't try to protect everything, right? You can't. There's not enough money in the world. You can't protect everything. Don't forget your reputation. If you do suffer a breach, we've all suffered breaches, right? I lived through WikiLeaks. That was really challenging. And the worst thing you can do is overreact to a breach. So I've lived through breaches where people's solution was to put glue in USB drives. So it made sense, right? We had a breach due to something malicious on a USB drive. Well, okay, that's it. We're going to put glue in the USB drive so nobody can use a USB. It doesn't make sense, but very large, sophisticated organizations do things like that, right? You have to be seen as doing something, right? It's better to look like you're busy, right? Whenever your boss comes, you always want to look busy. The basics haven't changed, right? How many people have a good network map of their network? Most people don't. Why? Because security people don't typically maintain this. We typically get it from the network folks. Compliance, don't forget compliance. Compliance is not exciting, but it's really important. If anybody does business in the EU, you should be on top of GDPR. Does everybody know what GDPR is? Right? The data protection requirements, if you want to do business in the EU, they are significant. If you have any data on European citizens and you do not report a suspected breach within 72 hours, your company could get fined up to 4% of revenue, not profit. Revenue. So if you're a company like Dell Technologies and you're doing somewhere between 80 and 90 billion in revenue, 4% is a real number. That is a significant amount of money. So if you are doing business in the EU, you should be paying attention to GDPR. Absolutely. Have a cloud strategy. I get that all the time now that I'm at the cloud side of Dell. People say, well, my CIO said I need 10% of my apps in the cloud. I say, well, why? I say, well, because my CIO said. That's not a strategy, right? You should be going into the cloud for specific reasons. Number one, it almost never saves you money, right? Because you will always wind up using more than you thought. So while you will transfer some of the problems and headaches, oh, well, now the vendor can deal with the patching. I don't have to deal with the patching. Or they can deal with the physical security. I don't have to deal with it, right? If you think you are going to save a lot of money, I have not often seen it save much. Again, if you gave me $10, authentication and identity is where I would spend my first dollar, because it is still the most important. Most breaches, still with who you are, still user-based. If you have mobile devices, you've got to be using containerization, right? You've got to be making sure that your data is not on the mobile device. Use containerization so that you control how the device accesses the information. Big data, artificial intelligence, all of these things are important. Why? Because people are expensive. And in the realm of security, people is what I have a hard time finding. I don't have a hard time finding software, right? Everybody's seen this, right? I don't have a hard time finding this stuff. What this stuff turns into is a big mess, right? And it's a big mess. Why? Because there's so many. There are so many. And you have to have the people who know how to pick the right tool and how to use the tool. If you just start buying tools, you're going to have a mess. Nothing replaces the people, right? People, process, technology, people's number one. And I firmly believe that. We talked about if you've been breached. We've basically all been breached. The question is, how long does it take you to find it? So when you look at dwell time, how long was the bad guy in there? That's what differentiates a good response from a bad response. If you look at the companies that have responded really well to breaches, they kept this dwell time to days. Not hours, days. I think days is pretty good. I've seen these in the realm of months and years. Training. Train your people. People are the weakest link. So people are your strongest advocate, right? Your security people are your strongest advocate. Your users can be your weakest link. You have to train your employees. We will spend millions and millions of dollars on tools and technology, and then we forget about our employees. And once a year, we'll sit down and have them do an automated training or sign a piece of paper, right? We're focusing on the wrong things. Your people is where the breaches come from. Employees accidentally clicking things. So why are you spending millions of dollars on tools and tens of dollars on training? Simplify, 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 right? In the world of IT, the more monitors you have on your desk, the more important you are, right? So everybody wants more monitors. The problem is, from a human point of view, and security is all about psychology, from a human point of view, we can only process so much information at any one time. If you have 7 monitors on your desk, you can't do anything with them. One of them's probably on Netflix, right? One of them is on the news. Another one, you're looking for a job because your boss put 7 monitors in front of you and expects you to function, right? So if this is a bad SOC design, what do you think about this poor guy, right? But these look really good, right? When you bring people in to look at your security operations center, you're like, oh my God, look at the monitors. Just look at the monitors. There is a lot of work going on there. You need to simplify. This is not flashy, but this is what my SOC looks like, right? And I got 89 data centers around the world, right? You know, hundreds of thousands of users and VMs at any one time. Simplify, simplify, simplify. And when you look at new tools, make sure those tools work with your existing tools. Do not buy a tool that requires you to add a second monitor or a third monitor. Insist that your tool vendors work with your other stuff. It will make your life easier and your employees' life easier. And this is where we need to go in security. I've been doing this for a long time, and I will tell you that as a CISO, every year it's something different. Every year I'm focused on something different. A couple years ago it was mobile devices, then it was Internet of Things, then it was WannaCry, now it's Spectre and Meltdown. Next year will be something different. So for me, I'm very excited to be here in Taiwan in the center of the chip hardware world, where I am hoping that I get to look to the people in this audience to help me. Because the information here in this room right now with regards to chips is going to change everything for the whole world. So as a security person, I'm looking to everybody here to help me. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all of your time. And again, thank you for having me. It's a beautiful country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. 非常感谢 Matthew 为我们带来精彩的分享。